Hello, my name is Emma Finch and today we're going to be talking about portrait editing basics. So we're going to be going through topics such as dodge and burn, exposure and contrast, white balance, removing distractions, skin retouch. We just want to give you some tools to help polish those portrait images. Now today I'm using mostly Photoshop, but whatever software you're using, so if you're using Lightroom, Capture One, Affinity, most of the functionality is going to be the same, and actually the icons are very similar as well. A few tips before we begin. When you are editing, make sure you're not in a very bright room or a very dark room. Also make sure your screen brightness is somewhere in the middle. You don't want to distort your editing. Second tip would be to take a look at the edited image on various devices. Sometimes it will look different on your phone, from your iPad, from your computer, and it's just a good way to check distractions in the image, check the exposure, things like that. Let's begin. Cropping and straightening. So if we go over to our cropping icon over on the left, we have a grid which helps us keep our verticals vertical, our horizontals horizontal. We can move the crop to where we want it. If you notice down here, we've gone a little bit off the edge. As long as we have content aware fill selected up here, Photoshop will fill that little area in with similar detail. White balance and colour. So if we feel that our white balance just isn't quite correct, or we have a slight colour cast, we can come down and add a colour balance adjustment layer. Then we have these sliders at the side, so we can just adjust it until where we feel it looks correct and true to the original colours. Here we're trying to match the skin tones. And then if we come down, we can switch it on, we can switch it off, just to make sure that we're happy with where we have it. Exposure and contrast. So if your image looks a little flat, it hasn't got much pop, we can come down and add a brightness and contrast adjustment layer. We've got the sliders at the side as before, so we can just adjust them until we feel it looks right. With this being a character model, I feel that we can add a bit more contrast for a bit more drama. If this was a female portrait, I would go a bit more easy with the contrast. But it's just giving it that extra pop, that extra little bit of drama. Curves. Curves are a great way to adjust the highlights and the shadows in your image. So if we come down and add the curves adjustment layer down here at the bottom, what that will do is it will bring up this chart. We can adjust it manually. So moving that curve up or down will pull up the highlights or the shadows, or an easier way is if you hit auto, Photoshop will work it out for you. You don't have to go with what Photoshop suggests, but it's a good guideline. We can change the opacity if we feel it's not quite how we want it to look. Dodge and burn. Dodge and burn basically means lightening and darkening. And it's an essential tool in allowing you to draw attention to the areas that you want your viewer to look at and concealing more the areas you don't really want them to look at. So we're adding a new duplicate layer. We don't want to work on the original layer. We want to add an extra layer because if we don't like what we've done, then we can either undo it or we can reduce the opacity. So starting first with the burn tool. Burning means darkening. We're using a soft tool, a soft brush. We're just painting over areas that look a little bit bright, that are just pulling the eye away from that face, which is the most important part of any portrait. We want to look straight in the eyes, we want to look straight in the face. So anything that looks a little bright, so the tunic, the handle of the axe itself is quite bright. We're changing our brush size depending on what area we're working on. And we're just painting over areas, anything that is pulling the eye. So if we switch that on and off again, we can already see it starting to make a difference. It's starting to guide the eye towards that face. So now we go to the dodge tool. Dodge means lighten. We're just going to pull out a few of the darker areas. So the face really wants to be the lightest part of any portrait. You want to look straight at the face. cloak is a little bit dark, just any areas that just are losing some detail, we want to just bring out the detail a little bit. So switch it on and off again. We can already see the eyes are going more towards that face and less towards the other parts of the costume. We've got the opacity tool here, so if we feel we've done too much, we can always pull it back a little bit, depending on how we think it looks best. A good way to find any distractions in your image is to either squint at your image or turn the whole image upside down. By doing that, your brain isn't trying to read what the image is, it's just looking for light and dark patches, and it's a good way to find out if there's anything that's going to pull the eye away from your main focal point, which for us really is the face. Distractions. If you find you've got distractions in your image, then you're going to want to remove them. So here the spot healing brush is your friend. We can change the brush size depending on what area of the image we're working on. So here we're just going to brush over that light stand leg and it's magically going to disappear. Then if we come down towards the floor, very messy floor, making the brush size smaller, we're just going to paint over some of the scuffs and the chips in the floor. Photoshop will do the rest. Another tip to get rid of distractions is the cloning tool. So with the cloning tool, you select an area that you want to paint over. Make sure your opacity is on 100%. And then again, you're just painting over some of those scuffs and chips, making them disappear, making the floor look a little bit tidier than it was before. Black and whites. So if we want to convert a colour image into black and white, coming down and adding a black and white adjustment layer, we have these sliders that we can move around, adjust it to where we feel looks correct. So for me, I'm looking at the skin and making sure it's correctly exposed, adjusting the hat, making sure it's not too bright, switching it on, switching it off again. One tip with black and whites, make sure your blacks are black, your whites are white, and you've got all the tones in between. Skin retouch. So basically with skin, you want to remove any imperfections that are temporary. So a spot, a bruise, a cut, anything that's not going to be there next week, you can remove that using either the cloning tool or the healing tool, which we've already looked at. And then for the rest of skin, really you want to make it look slightly more polished, but your subject still needs to look like your subject. So I now use software called Evoto, very easy to use. You've got all the sliders at the side. So if we zoom in, I can show you. If we move up to the skin area, we can just adjust the sliders more or less to where we want them to be. So reducing the texture, softening the skin. If we switch it on and off again, you can see the difference it's made. Also, if we come down to the hair section, we can play around with the hair, removing stray hairs, which is very useful. And the good thing about Evoto is once you've done one retouch, you can sync the rest of your images, so it will do the same thing to all your images. So it really will speed up your workflow. Just a couple of pointers before we go. Firstly, keep checking your edit with fresh eyes. Take a break from the computer for half an hour, for a day, come back to it and take a look. Check if there's any distractions in there that you need to take a look at. Secondly, go easy with the sliders. Keep it subtle, keep it natural, make people look like themselves. And then thirdly, to reduce editing time, get it right in camera. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this. Until next time, bye-bye.